Madam President, the month of May is a special time to celebrate the Americans who serve our country in uniform. May is Military Appreciation Month. On Saturday, we celebrate those currently serving on Armed Forces Day. And toward the end of the month, on Memorial Day, we honor those who gave their lives in defense of our country. South Dakota has a rich heritage of military service, and I'm proud to represent the men and women carrying on that heritage in the South Dakota National Guard, at Ellsworth Air Force Base, and serving in our military around the globe. Madam President, South Dakota is proud to support our troops. Our state is home to two major military installations that are fixtures of their communities. But 20 years ago, South Dakota was at risk of losing one of these bases. On May 13, 2005, 20 years ago, Madam President, the Defense Department announced that it was recommending South Dakota's Ellsworth Air Force Base for closure. I'm not the only one for whom this was a gut punch. Ellsworth is a point of pride in the Black Hills. It's been a national security asset since World War II, and it is home to the 28th Bomb Wing Squadrons of B-1B Lancers, which were performing a critical role in the global war on terror. But at the time, Ellsworth was a single mission base, and the Air Force saw savings in moving that mission elsewhere and closing the base. Madam President, in May 2005, I was a freshman senator, 5 months on the job. But now my state faced a major test, losing the base that would have been devastating to western South Dakota, and a significant loss, I might add, for our national security. So failure was not an option, but Ellsworth faced long odds. Past rounds of the Base Realignment and Closure Commission suggested we had a 12% chance of keeping the base open. Some at the time were ready to write Ellsworth's obituary, knowing it would take a miracle to save the base. Some thought it would take a political deal, and they doubted that South Dakota had the clout to pull that off. Madam President, we knew we weren't going to save Ellsworth through politics, and we weren't going to wait around for a miracle. Instead, we did it the South Dakota way. We worked hard, harder than we ever had. There were just over 100 days from the announcement in May to the final decision in August, and saving Ellsworth consumed that entire summer. My staff and I called everyone we could think of. I'm sure the BRAC Commission was tired of seeing me that summer, but I was determined to drive home the case for keeping Ellsworth open. And we poured through reams of data to make that case. It was a team effort. Bob Taylor in my Washington office and Kasai El-Haj in my Rapid City office didn't see much of their families that summer. The rest of the South Dakota delegation was involved. Then Governor Mike Rounds was involved as well. Retired Air Force officers like General John Michael Lowe and Colonel Pat McElgan lent their voices and expertise to the cause. And countless local officials, community members, and of course the 11,000, Madam President, South Dakotans who came to the BRAC hearing in Rapid City that June were all part of that team. Madam President, in the end, Ellsworth was not saved by miracles or politics. It was saved because we proved that Ellsworth was too valuable to close. Moving all the B-1s to another base was supposed to save money, but we proved that wouldn't actually be the case. Plus, we demonstrated the Pentagon's analysis had failed to account for a number of other factors. Consolidating the entire fleet of bombers in one place was a major vulnerability. An attack, extreme weather, or any issue at that base could ground the entire fleet of B-1s. And consolidation risked overwhelming maintenance and training capacity at that base. Madam President, it turned out that Ellsworth was just what the Air Force needed. And that's the argument that we made. As Colonel McElgan put it to the BRAC commissioners, and I quote, "Ellsworth has operational advantages to make it the ideal base for the 21st century," end quote. And as General Lowe testified, and I quote again, "Closing Ellsworth will deny the Pentagon a valuable base for future missions," end quote. Ultimately, in August, the BRAC Commission agreed, and it voted 8-1 to keep Ellsworth open. And since then, those predictions have proven right. Ellsworth's B-1s have been a consistent asset to our national security. In 2011, B-1s left Ellsworth to strike targets in Libya, marking the first time a B-1 fleet launched from the United States to strike overseas targets. Last year, Ellsworth B-1s conducted a CONUS-to-CONUS mission, taking a continuous 31-hour flight to the Indo-Pacific and back without landing. And we've continued working to demonstrate Ellsworth's value and ensure its future will never again be in jeopardy. In 2007, the Air Force Financial Services Center arrived on base. In 2012, the 89th Attack Squadron came to Ellsworth to control MQ-9 Reaper drones from ground control stations in South Dakota. In 2015, after a decade of work, we expanded the Powder River Training Complex, nearly quadrupling its size and making it the largest training airspace in the lower 48. And in 2021, the Air Force announced that Ellsworth would officially be named the first main operating base for the new B-21 Raider, a sixth-generation long-range strategic bomber. From BRAC to B-21. And the story continues. Madam President, 20 years ago, Ellsworth was said to be a liability. Today, it's very clear that it's a national security asset. And I'm working to make sure the base and the surrounding community have what they need to continue to play a key role in our national defense for generations to come. Madam President, before I close, I want to speak briefly about Troy Mink, a native South Dakotan whose nomination to be Air Force Secretary will be considered this week. Dr. Mink grew up in Lemon, South Dakota. He graduated South Dakota State University on a ROTC scholarship, and he met his wife, Jean, during their time in Brookings. And his service encompasses the breadth of the Air Force's mission. He began his career as a navigator instructor on a KC-135 crew. He flew 100 flights during the first Gulf War, including 8 combat missions. In the Air Force Reserve, he was the lead test engineer for ballistic missile test vehicles. Then in 2013, he became the Deputy Undersecretary for Space. In 2020, he was appointed the Principal Deputy Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. And in all his spare time, he's coached his kids' competitive robotics teams. Madam President, Troy Mink is someone who has the experience to lead the Air Force into the next frontier. And I look forward to seeing him take the Air Force to even greater heights once he is confirmed to this position.